Now that you've had some practice with writing Brights, let's look at a feature writing review talking about the different parts of a feature story and what you've learned so far. So, an alternative top, I kind of like it. You can think of it as a rebel if you're a rebel at heart, right? These are going to be tops of stories that aren't going to be telling us everything we need to know, but it's designed to draw us into the story. So you can use this with human interest, and even some news stories actually lend themselves to alternative tops. So the challenge here is to decide how long your lead is going to be. So as you've seen the examples, a lead can be one sentence, can be one line, can be multiple paragraphs. It really matters how long the story is. So a shorter story is going to have a shorter lead. Your Brights should not have long leads. They should be fairly short, one sentence, two sentences max, because otherwise you're going to wear your reader out and delay your reader's entry into the story. A longer story is going to have a longer lead. So if you think about it this way, so if we're going to go to a party, right, we're going to go to the mall, to a nice shop, and we want to buy a blouse or a shirt if you're a guy. We want to buy a top. So when we go to a party like that, we're going to buy a top that fits us, right? So if you're small, you'll buy a small top. You know, if you're triple X, you're going to buy what fits you. You're not going to buy anything too small. You're not going to buy anything too long. And so the more you read, the more you practice, the more you become accustomed to a proper length for a story. But again, sometimes you can err on a short side. If you're not sure what to do, you can't go wrong doing that. I wanted to show you this particular lead. Now, this has got some descriptive words in it, but even then it's not got too many, right? So the boy sits on the living room sofa, lost in his thoughts and stroking the family cat with his fragile hands. His younger brother and sister sit on the floor chattering and playing cards, but Sam is overcome by an urge to be alone. He lifts the cat off his lap, ignoring a plaintive meow, and silently stands, tottering unsteadily as his thin frame rises in the afternoon light. He threads his way toward the kitchen where his mother bends over the sink washing vegetables for supper. Most 14-year-old boys whirl through a room, slapping door jambs and dodging around furniture like imaginary halfbacks. But this boy, a 5-foot, 83-pound waif, has learned never to draw attention to himself. He moves like smoke. So that description, we don't know what's going on with him, right? We know his name is Sam, but we don't know why he appears to be fragile. And actually, that was a word used here. But if you notice, it's not any words. These are words that we would normally use in our vocabulary. It's quite conversational, but even the verbs are very strong, right? Stroking the family cat, right? His brother and sister are chattering and playing cards. Sam is overcome. He ignores a plaintive meow and silently stands tottering, right? So there's some adverbs in there too. He threads his way to the kitchen, right? Most boys whirl and slap and dodge, but he's learned never to draw attention to himself. So notice how important those verbs are. Now, I wanted to show you this example because this is an alternative lead. This is great when you have a story that has already been in the news and now we have something to add to it, right? So Tuesday was Darius Grimes' 25th birthday. He woke up looking forward to a birthday call from his father. Instead, he received a call that his dad, Roosevelt Honeybee Florida, had been killed. So that's a little teeny tiny anecdote, a little story of that day. And now the second paragraph, we find out what happened to his father, right? That his father was 3 men killed by gunfire, right? And so we get some more information there. And then we have a direct quote from the Baton Rouge Police Department spokesman. And notice now in the fourth paragraph, we're going to hear from Casey Rayburn Hicks. She works for the sheriff's department, and we're going to have her name first because we just switched speakers. It's okay to do quote speaker verb because we have spokesman McNeely, but now we have Casey Hicks. So we need to know a new person speaking. We need her name first. And so I wanted to show you what that looks like. So again, what size lead should I write? It really depends on the story. And I'm going over this again because we tend to struggle with it. We feel like we need to give our creativity full, escape, right? And I want you to do that, but you need to know what's appropriate. You want to get into the story. You don't want to delay anything. You can have a wonderfully creative lead, but then your reader gets lost and you lose your audience because you've taken too long. So when in doubt, go for shorter. We tend to use too many words anyway. So let me show you this. I love this story. Nick Aggett's workshop is just a stone's throw from the Torrance, California post office. That's a good thing too. When Aggett drops a postcard in the mail, it lands with a 5-pound thud. Right. So we don't know what in the world is going on with this guy's postcards, right? We're going to find out though, but I want to show you something right here. So if you look at that, you're going to see a play on words. So if you said stone's throw, you're right. And that's kind of a play on words. That means it's not too far away from his workshop's not too far away from the post office. So that's a figure of speech. So let's see what happens in the story. So we've got to have the nut graph. I don't care how great your lead is, it's going to lose it if we don't know what we're reading about. So the nut graph, again, is the equivalent of a straight news lead. It answers the W's and the H of the story, whatever we need to tell people. It follows the alternative lead and explains what we're reading, right? So here's our lead that we just read, and here is what the story's about. So Aggett is a sculptor who carves messages on leftover chunks of marble or granite. They become postcards when he adds scratched-on addresses and slap stamps on the slabs. Over the past year, he sent more than a ton of such postcards to 650 friends, fellow artists, and selected celebrities whose home addresses he can find. Now, notice that the writer used some of the techniques that you might have learned before. So he adds scratched-on addresses and slap stamps on the slabs. So if you remember from high school English, that's called alliteration. Now, you can't do that in a news story, in a serious story, but it works here. And he uses plays on word. He says leftover chunks and slabs, and he sent more than a ton of postcards, which is probably true. So that's a play on words, but I would imagine if he sent that many, then he sent close to a ton. Now think about it. After the nut graph, you're going to have your first direct quote. And this writer did exactly what I would have wanted to do for my very first quote in this story. So let's look at that. So after the nut graph, we want to start to meet people, right? And so the best way to meet people in a story like this is to have a direct quote. So here's the start of my third paragraph. Although he pays heavily for postage, up to $10 for some cards, he gets a stony reception from postal clerks. This writer had a blast, right? So look at all the plays on words. Now, this is exactly what I wanted to see in the story. When Nick comes in, we hide, said postal clerk Betty Baker. He's a nice guy. It's the rocks. They're heavy and dirty. And the first person I would have wanted to interview outside of Nick Aggett would have been somebody who worked at the post office, because these people have to deal with his cards, haul them everywhere, right? Deal with stamping them, deal with hauling them, deal with delivering them. So what do these people have to say? Now, the rest of the story, remember, is you can organize chronologically or categorically. That's usually two main ways that you can do it. You're not going to do most important to least important because we're not there right now, right? You're going to have to think about how you're going to organize that inside part of your story. What makes sense here? And so you can do a small outline, just a sketch maybe, or a bullet pointed list of what you're going to talk about first, second, and third. And inside of that middle part, you're going to weave together your indirect quotes, that information we could see if we were there, and then you're going to follow that by heart and head statements, those direct quotes, because by telling you some context, I can appreciate the direct quotes. Now, the best alternative endings are circular. So, a long story that you have some control over, how many people you interview, and you can look for these pieces of your story as you do the interview. That's where you're gathering your parts of a story. So, you want to know where you're going. What are you going to do when you get back to your office, to your house, and write your story? So, as you gather your information, you want to say, oh, this is my ending. Oh, this is my first quote. I need to get this. So when you get and you sit down, you've got everything that you need. So the best endings of a movie, the best endings of a book are going to tie the end to the beginning, right? Even in a slight way. So if you think about a movie you really like, there's probably something about it at the end that tied to the beginning. Usually a trilogy, the middle movie is never going to be my favorite because we're stuck hanging. We don't know what's happening. We've got to get to the third movie to find out how the end is going to tie to the beginning in some slight way. So good authors, good storytellers know where they're going before they even start. And that's what you're going to do. So one ending that we're going to do here, and now of course there are multiple types of endings for a story. It really depends on the story. But we're going to do something that's going to help you. We're going to pick out our favorite direct quote. That's going to be our end. We're going to take our direct quote and park it on the side, and we're not going to use it until the very end. And then we are going to allude, hint of that quote some kind of way in the lead. Now, again, there are lots of different ways to end. You can use a few words from that direct quote or the idea in the direct quote for your lead, but anything that you introduce, if it's a scene that you introduce or an anecdote, we're going to some way have it relatable at the end. So know where you're going to go before you even start. You should always pick your end first. Always do that. Now I'm going to show you Nick Agid's end. It's not following this, but I liked it because, as you notice, the author used cliches and had fun with the plays on words throughout the story. In fact, the whole story was like that. They interviewed people who got his postcards. And in fact, one senator wrote Nick a letter and said, hey, I love your postcard. Sorry, I'm so late responding. I have been weighted down with so many responsibilities. So the people in the story were doing the same thing. And that's why I think the author had that idea. So here is the ending to Nick's. Now, throughout the story, we heard from postal workers, we heard from people who received the cards, people who knew him, people who watched him do it. And so here we have the end, right? I'd go to the library and look up celebrities' addresses and write them. It became a real adventure to go to the mailbox each day. Here's the last paragraph. Those on Agid's mailing list cannot wait for his next letter either. See, so because the author started with a play on words right up front, he kept on doing it, and so it works at the end right here. So I wanted to show you this because we don't always have to use a direct quote. We're going to do that for our writing because I think we need a format that we can follow, something that we can use in the future, something for your toolbox. So let's look at, again, I'll talk about feature ending away. Let's talk about looking at our direct quote again. So one thing, there will be plenty of good quotes from your person, but a lot of times you can look at something the person might say going forward, from where the person is now and what the person's looking forward to, maybe a future plan, maybe a lesson learned. And again, when you're doing the interview, you're going to ask those open-ended questions. We're going to talk about interviewing in the next module. And so how do you craft your questions so that you can get those really good heart and head statements? So I like to pick something that kind of encapsulates the story, gives us a synopsis from that speaker's point of view of what he learned. Save that for the end again and allude to it in your alternative lead. Let's go through some quotation review really quickly because we did it in the previous module, but I want to make sure that you don't forget, right? So indirect quotes are the same as paraphrase, and that's when you use your own words to relay the speaker's words. And we do this because we explain what we could see if we were there. This would be information that is not anything new maybe, or that we can get from different sources, maybe an observation, something like that. Most of your story is paraphrased because you can provide context, you can add information. You can again use some of the speaker's exact words. You don't have to put quotes around all of it. In the paraphrases, you probably will. But you're going to have to add maybe the grammar's not good or there's a reason why you choose to paraphrase it. Most of your story is going to be paraphrased. Now, direct quotes use the speaker's exact words. We aren't going to change anything, right? So direct quotes, I like to say those are the sound bites of digital journalism. So sound bite is what you hear if you watch a video or you see it in a video, you hear it in an audio story. We have words, right? So direct quotes are our sound bites, and you're going to use the same principles for collecting audio and video sound bites that you do here. Those are always going to be your heart and head statements. So this reflects what we can't see, right? We can't know this if the person doesn't tell us how he or she feels or how he or she thinks about the circumstance. And then partial quotes are when we use some of the speaker's exact words in a sentence. Now, I like to avoid this the way we avoid bad traffic and people who talk too much, right? I'm only going to use this if there's just a phenomenal partial quote that is so unique to the person. For whatever reason, I don't have a complete sentence. But my goal, and in your writing, and the story that you're going to do next about the hiker, you do not need to use partial quotes anywhere. This guy has some great complete sentences. So your goal is always to have full, complete sentence direct quotes. Now, here are a few guidelines. Again, we're going to use the quote speaker verb order in most cases. It looks like this, right? Samson was not a good judge of female character, comma, Smith said. So we have our quote, our speaker, and our verb. If we're switching speakers the way I showed you that story earlier, then we're going to have to put our new speaker first. So here's the first statement. However, Jones disagreed. So now Jones is going to talk, right? And there are lots of ways that we can introduce our new speaker, but we're going to have to put that person's name first so that your audience knows that we're switching gears, that Smith is not continuing to talk. Each time you have a direct quote, we're going to have it in its own paragraph. Each time you switch speakers, that new speaker starts a new paragraph. And again, any type of fictional writing, you probably don't even notice it. But when there's a dialogue going on in the story, speaker 1 is a new paragraph, speaker 2 is a new paragraph, speaker 1 is again a new paragraph. And we track along with that. Eventually, the writer drops the attribution because we can track with which character is speaking because of the new graphs, right? So in a multi-sentence quote, you're going to put the attribution after the first sentence, even if we have only one speaker, right? So Will Henderson in our hiker story is our only speaker. So that doesn't matter. The audience doesn't know that. So we're going to help the audience. Every time we have a chunk of direct quotes, we're going to do this way. Put it after the first sentence, and we can enjoy the sentences that follow. So here's some good guidelines. Again, I know I've repeated myself somewhat, but we've got so much to remember. And so I want you to have a great time writing your feature story.